change the height to wrap content. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a little add button over here. And then I'm going to put another, so underneath this guy, I'm going to put a scroll view. And I'm going to have the scroll view's height set to wrap content like that. And what I'm going to do just as a starter, I'm going to throw a text view inside here. We'll end up dumping it later. Just we'll call that a line of code, something like that. Let's just get them added first, because I think one thing we could do is maybe put some buttons in there for editing it or something, or we can use a traditional table view or something, which would then also be clickable. But you know, in any case, I'm going to throw I need another layout here, so I'm going to give myself a horizontal linear layout right here. I'm going to put this guy in there. And then I'm also going to throw a button in there. All right, so I'm going to have this guy wrap content. And we'll have this button say add. So the idea is when you click this button, whatever text is in here will get added to the scroll view. And we're going to have the height of this guy wrap content. Okay, so type in some code, click add, it'll add it to this linear layout. We're going to name this guy, let's call this guy code. Stack might be misleading. Maybe code list. Yeah, we'll just call it code list. That'll be good enough. So we're going to give ourselves access to this guy as a view group, so we can add things to it. Let's go back into our code here. So this is, I'm lost, main activity. So private view group code list on create. We'll go ahead and say this dot code list is equal to the view group version of this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot code list. All right, so now we have access to that guy. The very first thing I'm going to do is empty code list of our placeholder values. The placeholder values just gave us a visual of what was there. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to say this dot code list dot remove all views. So that'll empty that guy out. So we're ready to put stuff into it. Then I'm going to have a public void add code button pressed UV. And what this guy is going to do is it's going to create a text view with the code that's currently in our input ET, add it to our code list, and then empty input ET. So we'll say, we'll ask the question. We're going to say if this dot input ET dot get text dot to string dot length. If that guy is greater than 0, that is if there's stuff in there, then we'll go ahead and say text view TV is equal to a new text view with this context, tv.setText, and we're going to set the text to this dot input et.getText.toString. Then we'll say this dot codelist dot add view tv. Then this dot input et dot set text to the empty string. Something like that. Okay, then we'll go back out to activity main. I want to make sure for this input guy we have a, the hint says enter ARM code. So when it gets emptied out, it'll have enter ARM code in there. So we're going to say the on click for this add button. It's going to be our add code button. Okay, so now we should be able to type in various pieces of code and always add it to the end of our list. Let's make sure that's the case. All right, so I'll hit add. If I hit add again, nothing happens. All right, so now what I want to do is I'm going to not empty it out. That way I can easily add multiple lines. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the X5 and the 100, although I guess it's not that big of a deal. I could say move Z X2 50, something like that. All right, so now when we click run, we want it to process through all of the text views that are in our. All right, so go back here to our run button. Okay, run button clicked. So we're going to say for text view TV in this dot codelist dot they're just like children. We can't okay, so can't do a for each then. So we'll say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than this dot code list dot child get child count I plus plus. All right, then we'll go ahead and we're going to say temp is equal to this dot code list dot get child at I, and we know that this guy is going to be a text view. All right, so then we will go ahead and say we're going to want to make sure we do the trim thing here. Although we could have done the trim thing up there too. Well, we'll do it in both places probably. So we're going to say this dot execute instruction temp dot get text dot toString dot trim. So that'll process all the different lines of code that are in there from all our different text boxes. Then we'll say instructions complete. And assuming we have those two different move Z's, we should have X5 and X2 set to something proving we did more than one line. Okay, so let's test that. All right, so there's our move Z5. Then we'll say move Z X2 50. Add that. We'll hit run. Instructions complete. Let's look at registers. There's 5 and there's 50. All right, so now we have multiple lines. How would we edit?
The list. Do you have a selector that like you click with an up and down arrow?
Not a bad
like
idea.
A
How do you highlight it? Yeah, so
like another box that's like somewhat visible. I don't know if you make that in its attributes and then have that box shift. I don't know if you can do that.
Well, one thing you can do is you can reorder stuff with a list view, but we'd have to change this some, because right now we're kind of building our own list view using a scroll view and a vertical linear layout. If we use a list view, then you use this thing called an array adapter, which is fine. That's not a big deal, especially since we're only storing strings. And then we can reorder stuff, but I don't want to spend too much time figuring that stuff out. So maybe we just say get the code right the first time. Okay, so in any case, we have multiple lines of code now. So what we're going to, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you want a clear button though? So that way, like, if you did make a mistake after you add it.
Yeah, I'm thinking clear, and then also
clear the last line maybe, because you probably find that mistake right away after you click to add.
Yeah, so maybe like a remove last.
Yeah, something like that.
A clear, which empties them all out.
Yeah, maybe something like that.
And then maybe a save, which will put it up in Firebase. Give ourselves 3 buttons.
I like it.
All right, so maybe put those. You want to put them below the thing, but above run, or you want to put them above the thing?
Put it above the move Z X5. So, like right
so put it below, right enter the code.
3 buttons. Or the bottom, I don't know.
Okay. So you would have it above run and just have our 3 buttons there? Okay. So let's go to activity main. Above our run button, I'm going to put a horizontal linear layout. Okay. And then I'm going to put some buttons in there. Okay, and then I'm going to set this guy to wrap content for height. All right, and then this button is remove last. This one is clear. This one is save. All right, so let's do remove last and clear first. So we'll say public void on remove last button pressed UV. Then I'll have a second one, public void on clear button pressed UV. So clear is going to say this dot code list dot remove all views. On remove last is going to say if this dot code list dot get child count is greater than 0, then this dot code list dot remove view at index this dot code list dot remove let's see, get child count -1. That should be the last guy. and then hook those couple buttons up. So remove last on, last button pressed, and here's clear. On clear button pressed, go ahead and hit play, make sure these guys work. So for the mobile app teams for the hackathon, this would be kind of the stuff you'd be doing for the hackathon, is building out an app like this. All right, so I'll add something. I'll go ahead and click remove last. I'm going to add something else. Add something else. Remove last, only gets rid of that. Add some more stuff. Hit clear, that removes everything. Okay. So now when we save, do we because we really need to have two different things. We need to have a screen where we can select code that we've previously written, and then we have we need to have a place when we save it. We need to name it, right?
So you need a load button as well.
Well, maybe, because what we could do is for these buttons up here, registers, RAM, we could say files. And that takes us to the file screen. And on the file screen, it would show us our current saved files, but files are always going to have a name associated with the list of code.
Those files will be from Firebase?
Well, yeah. This will ultimately store into Firebase. We're going to have to give ourselves a visual here for working with that. All right, so what I'm going to do then is we're going to create another screen here. So I'm thinking when we hit save, that's going to take you to the other screen, passing the current list of code that you want to save to that screen, and then having having you name it and then hit save again. That way it saves with that name. But if we go to files and we select something from there that we want to then load into here, when we select it, it'll load into here, but it would then remember when we hit save, it would remember that this guy is somebody who's already been loaded, so we'll just save it with the same name rather than taking you to the other screen. So it would be flagged as to whether or not this screen is in new mode or in updating an existing file mode. Does that make sense? So what we'll do is we will probably in core, we'll go ahead and say static Boolean main activity mode. Actually, let's make this a string. And by default, we'll set this equal to new. Probably this should be like an enumerated type where we would say, something.new, something.update, something.whatever, but we'll just hard code it now. It's not the end of the world. So by default, it's in new. So when we hit that save button, we will check to see what the current activity mode is. And it's equal to new, then we're going to take them to the screen to save a new thing. If it's equal to update, we'll update the current one and save it to Firebase using the exact same name it previously had. So with that in mind, we probably also then need to have a string main activity file name and a static string main activity file ID. So by default, those won't have anything in them because this says new. But if this was changed to update, this guy would have the name of the file, and this would have that unique result from push to give it a unique ID. So we make sure we wrote it to the exact correct place. That way you potentially could have two files named the same thing. We certainly probably would want to check to see if you had two files named the same thing, but at least this guarantees uniqueness in the database. Otherwise, if you tried to write a file called Mike, and then you wrote a different file but happened to name it Mike, it'll overwrite Mike with the new Mike. So if we use those unique IDs, then it'll allow us to have two files named Mike, but they're technically different files.
On activity, that last one you just did there, it says C instead of...
No, it spelled it the way I wanted to spell it. Activity. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's write the code for our save button. Now what really sucks is I really want to give you some of this to do for next week. You got the hackathon this weekend. It's going to be a lot of work. But then again, we didn't have class. But why should you be punished? Other than it brings me joy. Now, we'll see where we get to. Maybe I'll have you read ahead in the book. Maybe we'll do that instead of assignment, because I do want to move into some other material too, so we can integrate it back into here. Okay, so let's go into main activity, and we'll go ahead and write our save button. Public void on save button pressed UV. And we'll ask the question if core dot main activity mode dot equals new. We will go to new file save screen. Else, presuming it's going to be equal to update, but why don't we ask it just in case? Else if core dot main activity mode dot equals update, save this file using the same name and unique ID as before. Because we presume we've loaded this from another screen. All right, so we need to create a screen called for like saving a file. That's going to be in our app in Java. So we'll call this guy save file activity. So it's going to be a new activity, empty activity. Save file activity. Did I spell it right? Nailed it. Okay. Okay. I'm going to get rid of register and RAM for right now. All right, so let's design this guy. So for saving this, we're going to have a text box up top for us to enter in the name of the file, right? So I'll go ahead and throw in my vertical linear layout. I'll throw in my text. It's not a text view, it's an input text, right? And we probably want to have this guy be oh, there was our multi-line text. That's the magic we needed before. But now our thing is so much better. It's so awesome. We wouldn't have to worry about deleting with with this guy. All right, so I'll just throw plain text in there. And I'll put a hint. Enter file name. All right, and then we'll go ahead and show them their current text. We probably could do that with a text view, because I think text views will automatically stretch out. So this will be read-only code view, TV. Ruh-roh. Okay. And then we'll have a save button somewhere in here. So let's just get us to the screen first, passing the right piece of information. So when we hit that save button, we're going to need to store a couple of things. Now we have some options. We can either store the stuff in core and have this guy read from it, or we can pass it directly to the activity. One of the advantages of passing it directly to the activity here is we don't want core to get too cluttered up with stuff. Because really, this specific activity needs to know about the file name and it needs to know about the lines of code. That's all it needs, right? So if we could just pass him those two things and he can just locally use them, that would be pretty ideal. That way we don't clutter core up with something else we have to remember. All right, so this guy is called save file activity. So we go back to main activity. So here's the new file screen. So we're going to say intent I is equal to new intent this. Is it this? And then save file activity dot class. I think that's how you write it. Then I'm going to say this dot. How do you load an activity? Show activity? Start activity. Start. We'll add the extras here in a second. Start activity I. Let's just make sure this guy starts up the way we want him to start up. So initially our main activity mode is new. We'll say start activity. It should launch that new page with nothing in it, but let's just make sure it's taking us there before we package some stuff. All right, hit save. Probably need to hook that thing up to our button. On click, here's our save button pressed. Run that again. All right, so that takes us to the right place. All right, so now we want to make sure we populate the code. So in here, before we launch the activity, we want to go ahead and grab all of our lines of code from our current code list and probably pass it over there as like a linked list of strings or something like that. Makes some sense, right? Perhaps let's send it as an array list of strings, since that's what we're going to need it as anyways, right? So we'll create an array list of strings. Well, actually, a linked list would have stored, but whatever. So we'll call this guy the code, and this is going to be a new array list. Okay, and then I'm going to say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than this dot code list dot get child count, I plus plus, and then we're going to go ahead All right, so then we're going to go ahead and grab the current child. So that's going to be this dot codeless dot get child at index. We know that this guy is going to be a text view. And we want to take that text view and get its text to string trim. And actually, let me just steal this whole thing for a second. And we're going to say the code dot add that. All right, so after we fill up our array list with all of our code, we'll say I dot add, what was it, I dot extras, put extra. And we're going to put the code, comma, the code. All right, so we'll package along with that intent our array list of code, which means that inside of save activity, where's that guy? Get rid of register activity. Get rid of RAM activity. Did I never open save activity? You lying?
Save file activity. Yep.
Oh. Why did that, to me, that looked like another XML file. It's not as blue as these other ones are. Yeah, you see how this is blue?
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
This is your fault, Edwin. Yeah, you can't play tricks like this on old people. We'll wander around for hours. Just just. All right. Do you know Blade? Was he before? You know Blade, right, Van? Chinese guy.
Yeah.
He might have been. I think he already graduated before you guys had started, but he works here in Milwaukee. But his real name is Yiming Liao. We call him Blade. He went to hackathons with us. That was always his name at hackathons, Blade. Well, I still go to breakfast with him every Saturday. You know, we're buddies. In fact, I should see if he wants to stop by the hackathon on Saturday and just say hi to people. But I meet him and a couple other former students most Saturdays for breakfast. And this last week, I met him for breakfast, and we went to this new place. And when we went in, I told the hostess that, I'm waiting for somebody. I would go ahead and sit down, but I'm waiting for a really confused-looking Chinese guy. Okay, which actually fits Blade perfectly. So Blade walks in, and the lady knew what I was talking about, but so she didn't really say anything. Well, after he'd been sitting there for about 3 or 4 minutes, he thought he had forgot his phone. All right. So he got up, he was going to walk out to his car to get his phone. So he walks towards the front door, starts like wandering around by the front desk, like literally just walking in circles. Then comes back and had kind of remembered that he must have had it in his pocket of his coat, his jacket. But I mean, like, I didn't even tell him that I said, I didn't say, I told them look for a confused Chinese guy. So he's just wandering around the hostess stand of this place. It's pretty funny. I should contact Blade, see if he wants to stop by the hackathon. That way you guys have context for my stories.
Was he here last hackathon?
No.
He was here the last hackathon.
I think I know him.
Yeah. Yeah. He was one of the team leads the last hackathon.
Yeah, was he here
It's
the
probably
day we
not.
had a computer science meeting? He was in there, right?
No, it's probably.
He wasn't here for the get-together.
No, okay. Then I
Not this time. Not this recent
Not
one.
the last hackathon.
Okay, then I
Are you sure? It's 2 hackathons ago?
Yeah, 2 hackathons.
okay. Wait, what was it? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I put him in the group with all the other Chinese guys.
Because the last hackathon is all VR.
Yeah.
So there's no TV
Yeah.
driving people in VR.
Because I like to segregate cultures.
What? I missed it.
I said I think I put him in a group with all the other Chinese guys, because I like to segregate cultures.
The Shang, Sang.
Yeah.
He say, Blade is a cocky guy. Sang is speak English is so not is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And he say, well, what the fuck is this? The guy is speak Chinese and don't speak Chinese with me. Just keep talking English with me. His English suck.
Blade's English is good though.
No, but when he speak, it put it in play. It's not broken English, but when his accents is pretty hard to understand for Chinese people.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
that's why he's saying his English suck.
I see.
But he don't communicate with me in Chinese, so I don't understand much English either. So
Oh, I see.
I'm both dumb.
Gotcha. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get our code list variable from this guy. So this is our activity save. Here's the codes. This is read only code view blah 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 blah. And that guy is a text view, right? So we'll say private text view. Read-only code view. And then in here, we'll say this dot read-only code view is equal to this dot find view by ID, r dot ID dot read-only code view. I'll throw a TV on here and a TV on here. Okay, so we have that guy. Now we also need to go ahead and get our array list from the extras. So we're going to say array list of string, call this guy the code, and this is going to be equal to this dot get intent dot get extra. Is it get serializable extra? There we go. Get string array list extra. And we called this guy the code, I think. The code. Okay, then we'll go ahead and say for string s in the code this dot read only code view dot actually I think we need to build a string first. String code is equal to the empty string. So we'll say this, say code plus equals x plus carriage return. This should give us one extra carriage return at the end. So we'll go ahead and say code dot set, sorry, this dot read only dot set text, and we're going to set it to code dot trim, which I think will take that extra carriage return off, because we'll have one final extra carriage return after the last time through. So this should receive our array list from the intent, then build up a carriage return delimited string of the lines of code and throw it into our code. So let's make sure this guy's doing what we think it should do. All right, so I'll add that line, then we'll do a move z x2 50. We'll add, we'll click save, and there's our code in there. All right, so now we would type in a file name, maybe call this guy my file, and the save button we would put, I'm thinking maybe put the save button to the right of the text thing, maybe. It's kind of where we put it in the previous thing. So I would go ahead and go to layouts and horizontal vertical layout, throw that there, throw this guy in there. Then I'll throw my button also in there, except it's on the wrong side. Okay, we'll call this guy save. I actually don't really like it right next to it. That's plain text. We're going to have this guy wrap content. Well, that's weird. I'm going to get rid of that guy. I'm going to get rid of this guy. There's that. There's my button. This guy will say save. We'll name this guy. We actually don't even need to give him a name. Let's set width to wrap content. Oh, wrong one. There we go. All right, so we'll give them a big old save button. So they'll give it a file name. They'll hit save. That will then hit Firebase and save this code. So to save something, we're going to have to give we're going to create an object, maybe called code, right? Or maybe called code file, since we're going to be reading it back in as that. And actually, that's going to then change the way we handle this. We don't need to have this activity file name and ID. We'll just have a code object, a code file object that is the current guy we're working with. It'll be null otherwise. All right, so I'm going to create a new file here, Java class, and we're going to call this guy a code file. Yes, I want to add it to the repository. Okay, and this guy is going to have a public string ID. It's going to have a public, let's actually think how that ID will end up working. Yeah, this will work okay. So public string ID, then we're going to have a public array list of strings called the code. And then public string name. Okay. Now, actually, the only two pieces of information we're going to store inside of our code file for saving to Firebase is going to be the code and the name. The ID is something that we will put in there but we're not going to advertise it as part of the map. So the ID is for our purposes only on our side, because we're going to have to use push to generate that ID. And then we'll use that ID later when we go to save it, because it'll tell us our endpoint rather than generating a fresh endpoint. Does that make sense? So we're gonna get that key. So we'll have to, when we read it in, we'll have to set it the right way, because the reading it in is not going to automatically set the ID for us. All right, so we need to have our public code file, no argument constructor that does nothing. Then we'll have our public code file that takes in a name and an array list of code. This dot name is equal to name. This dot to the code is equal to the code. All right, so that'll set those two things. Then we need to write our toMap thing, and let me, just so I can grab the syntax for it. I know it's returning a hash map, but since we have it over here, might as well use it. All right, so there's our toMap thing for this, and we're going to be mapping name is this dot name, and we're going to be mapping the code is this dot the code, and we're not going to store anything else, not storing the ID. The ID is going to be part of the database structure. All right, and we will return the result. And then just for testing purposes here, I'm going to go ahead and say, here, inside this, I'm going to say this.id is equal to n/a. So we'll know that that's it didn't receive an ID, ID thing. So we'll say public void display. And this guy will do a system.out. .println. You know, we actually don't need to do a display on this because we can just call it directly when we need it. Waste of time writing that. Okay, so here's our toMap. Here's the thing we need to make it work, and making these public is required to make it work. ID technically doesn't need to be public. We could make that private and then have a setter for it, but whatever. All right, so that is that piece. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to write some stuff. So one thing we can do is we can teach our code file how to save itself to Firebase. So here in our code file, I'm going to steal that piece. Ruh-roh. Actually, that would probably work out pretty well. All right, so we'll have a public void save. So we'll go ahead and create our database reference. Then we're going to create our, we'll call this file ref. And this is going to be in a folder called files. Okay. Then we're going to go ahead and need to do the push. So actually we'll say get reference dot push like that. That will give us our unique ID. Okay, I don't need both references. So I just said file ref is going to be equal to get reference for the database, for the directory called files, and then do a push on that to give you your unique file thing. Now, we only need that. Here, I want to write this a little bit better. I'm going to write it like that first. Then we're going to say if this dot ID dot equals n/a, which means this is a brand new file. Then we'll say file ref is equal to file ref dot push. So we'll expand it to give us the unique identifier. Otherwise, if we already have an ID, which means we're actually resaving a file that already exists, then we'll say file ref is equal to file ref dot child this dot ID. Because we've already previously generated that, so this allows us to specify what that unique file name is. Make sense? This is something that isn't in the, this will help your teams when you go to write this. This will probably be something that'll be fairly common in apps for the hackathon. All right, so one way or another, we're ready to save after this is done. All right, so our file ref is going to point to the right place, either a brand new place, if this is the first time we're saving this, or it's going to point to the place it used to point to, and we're just updating the value that lived there. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to say file ref dot set value, and the value we're going to set is this. Okay, because we're going to set code file, and it will call that guy's to map. That make sense? All right, so that will save this file one way or another. So let's go ahead and go back to our save file activity. And let's see, that's on create. So now we're going to do our public void. I'm going to need our input name too. Let's do that before I forget it. What's this guy called? This guy's going to be file name ET for edit text. All right, give myself access to that guy. So we're going to have a private edit text file name ET. Inside here, we'll say this dot file name ET is equal to the edit text version of this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot blah blah, that guy. Okay, so then we're filling up our code thing there. We might as well, since we're going to need the array list anyway, I'm going to define this guy up here, and then I'll just set it equal to its value down here. That way I have global access to that. All right. Okay, because this is really just for display purposes, right? What I'm actually saving is that array list. All right, so then down here, we'll have our public void on save button pressed UV. We're going to go ahead, we're going to create a brand new, in this case, we'll go ahead and create a brand new code file, because presumably we would only be on this screen if we're saving a brand new one. But we still might use code file objects to save existing ones. So I'll say code file CF is equal to, before I write anymore, I need to change something again real quick while it's on my mind. All right, so in this case, if we did a push here, I then need to say this dot ID is equal to file ref dot get key. That'll get me that ID. So if I happen to have a brand new one here and I want to do a push, FileRef.getKey will set this.id equal to that unique identifier. Otherwise, it must have already been set. Okay. And I'll make sure I push this so you have it up there if you want to reference it during the hackathon. All right, so now we'll go back in here. So on save button pressed, we're going to go ahead and create a new code file. CF, and this guy's going to be a new code file. And code files take in a name and an array list. So our name is going to be, and we really probably only want to do this if this dot file name et dot get text dot toString dot length is greater than 0, as long as they put stuff in there. Now it's savable, so we'll go ahead and we will create this guy, passing it this dot file name et dot get text dot toString. We'll do a dot trim in case they put some extra spaces on it or something. That's going to be our file name. And then our code is called this dot the code, which is our array list. And then we'll say cf dot save. And just to test to make sure this works, I'm going to go ahead and say system.out.println. I'm going to put some asterisks, that way it's easy to find. And I'll print out cf.id. That should show us the unique folder that that guy happens to be saved in. Okay, so when we hit the save button on the screen, only if we've actually given it a file name will it create a new code file and then tell that file to save itself. So we've kind of encapsulated the save ability into our object. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Let me make sure I have our... Okay, yeah, this is our code for this, our database for this, rather. All right, so I'll add this line. I'll go ahead and add another line. Move Z, X, 2, 50, add. We'll hit save. If I hit save a couple times, nothing's going to happen because that guy's still empty. So we'll call this my first file. I need to probably take that word name out of there. I'll go hit, oh, actually it did have name in it, so I probably did save it a couple times already now. Is the real problem here. So, all right, so let's go back now. Actually, I never hooked up the save button. So I definitely didn't save. Okay, but then I can go in here and I can take the name out of this. And we'll put a hint in. Enter file name. Okay. So add, move Z, X2, hit save, my file, hit save, go back here, here's my files, here's my unique identifier for that guy, here's my, it's saved ID. Which is okay, but now I'm confused on why it saved ID. Here's the code, so that all looks fine, but it should not have saved the ID. Because ID is not in this to map.
Oh, so the if segment down there is the if ID equal to
I'm going to make that guy private. I wonder if making it public's what actually exposed it, which then tells me that maybe I don't need this to map. So let's just dump this record here. So I didn't want it to save the ID. And that wasn't part of my hash map, which leads me to believe that because it was public, it went ahead and saved it, not because toMap did anything, which then leads me to believe that toMap's not even necessary. What's my error? Why?
That's a problem. So
That doesn't make any sense to me. What if I just make it? That still is package level, so it would be able to set it. Interesting. Yeah.
because I think in the if statement you say if something and else something, if that else is like exists, it's gonna say like
Well, no. That's not what's happening. Oh, hold on. I see what you're saying.
yeah, but if the ID already exists, it's gonna say.
Well, no, but it's still the way I've explained this to you is that it calls toMap when it saves.
Okay.
This indicates that it's not calling toMap, so I should be able to remove toMap there. Let's go ahead and dump this, and it should do the exact same thing it's doing right now, because it's actually going through and bringing in all of the accessible public variables, public fields. Add, save, whatever. Yep. So that toMap is not needed. Huh?
Did you comment it out?
I deleted it. No, it's gone.
Is that like the two map that you showed us earlier?
Yeah.
So you don't even need that?
Remember I said that Firebase is updated. It's much more integrated now.
Oh, okay.
So it's going through and identifying all of the, I guess, not.
Taking that name, same name, variable name.
Yeah. Well, so I was thinking if I made this guy private, it would be hidden from it.
Yeah.
It doesn't like that. That's very interesting. Now, this is actually okay from the perspective of our database. The worst that happened is, we do have a unique folder for this guy, and then inside there we just happen to repeat the ID, which would actually probably make it easier to get the ID in the future. I won't have to extract it. So that's fine. Just seems kind of weird, right? Yeah, I don't know. All right, so in any case, let me go ahead and commit this. So you have the most up-to-date version of this. You can reference it at the hackathon. Firebase support. I'll do a commit and push. Okay. And actually, just real quick, I want to come in here. Well, I mean, we're done with class. I just want to try this. So this indicates that I should be able to take out the 2 map from here. I should be able to take out the 2 map from here. I'm going to take out these extra property stuff too. And then in main activity, I'll show both versions of. I'll call both versions of that so people who are looking at this can see they can either create the listener themselves or use an alternative listener. So then let me go in here. Let me dump my users. Then let me run this. Oh, wrong. Let me run this.
So, hackathon setup. I mean, about the hackathon setup. So, what do you want to do with it?
What do you mean?
The computer and stuff.
Oh, well, the VR room is already set up.
Okay.
So we don't really need to worry about it. And then the other room, will people probably just have their own laptops or they can use the Mac lab.
So VR already.
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to actually do any additional setup because the department's set up for this better.
Is the VR, does everybody, so is that back room that you're using for VR?
Yeah.
And then does everybody go back there, or do you write stuff and then you go back there and try it out?
Oh, no, not that back room.
Oh, okay.
No, this whole room over here has 6 VR setups in there.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's our VR room.
Gotcha.
What I showed you before with the mixed reality thing, that's our VR cart that we take around campus.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. We have VR out the wazoo in this room.
Gotcha.
So there'll be. So let me push this. I'm going to update the.
Database files.
Why don't we have fun?
Yeah, masters. Yeah, I got my undergrad in mathematics and then physics. Well, minor in physical science, I guess.
Where is your major, Jonathan?
Mathematics.
Mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like Tim.
Tim?
Tim did
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really like science.
Why side?
Mm-hmm.
Good for you. You like science? You like science? Why the highlight then?
Just always wanted to.
What?
Always wanted